The sky was the color of copper dust and fading sun as Mary led the tired mule along the narrow wilderness trail, her husband Samuel trudging behind her with his shoulders stooped beneath the weight of a journey that had stretched far longer than their hope. Their wagon had broken down 2 days earlier, leaving them stranded with only a mule, a handful of supplies, and the distant promise of the homestead they were desperate to reach. They had been traveling for hours beneath the punishing sun, each step a prayer that the next ridge would bring relief. When Samuel staggered, Mary turned at the sound, saw the pallor in his face, the way his hand pressed to his side, as though holding something inside that threatened to give way. "Sam," she whispered, hurrying to his side. But before she could steady him, his knees buckled and he pitched forward, collapsing in a cloud of dust that hung heavy in the air. Panic surged through her veins as she dropped beside him, her fingers fumbling at his neck, her breath catching when she felt the faint, faltering beat of his pulse. His lips were parched, his eyes half closed, his chest rising with shallow, strained breaths. The trail stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of desolation beneath a sky now bleeding into twilight. "Please, no, not here, not now," she murmured, her hands shaking as she tried to lift his head, tried to shade his face with her bonnet, tried to think past the roaring in her ears. They had left behind the nearest settlement nearly a day ago, and ahead was nothing but miles of barren land before the promise of their claim. There was no one coming, no one until the wind shifted and she heard the distant, rhythmic thunder of hooves. At first she thought it a trick of exhaustion, the echo of her own frantic heartbeat, but then the sound grew louder, closer, until over the crest of the hill appeared a figure, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, hat brim casting his face into shadow, a lasso coiled at his side, and the dust of a long ride clinging to his coat. A cowboy. He reined in his horse when he saw her kneeling there, his keen eyes taking in the scene with a single sweep. "Ma'am." His voice was low, calm but edged with urgency. "Is he breathing?" "Barely," she managed, the words breaking against her dry lips. "He collapsed. I can't get him up." The cowboy swung down without another word, his boots hitting the earth with a dull thud. He knelt, checked Samuel's pulse, pressed a canteen to his lips, lifted Samuel gently, carefully, as though the man weighed no more than a child onto the back of his tall bay stallion. His strength startled Mary, not because it was brute or showy, but because it was practiced, the strength of a man who had carried more than his share of burdens in a land that spared no one. "Climb up behind me," he said, extending his hand to her. "We'll ride through. The wagon can wait for morning." Her mind rebelled at the thought of leaving their only means of survival behind. But one look at her husband's ashen face, his shallow breath whispering like dry leaves, silenced her hesitation. She grasped Luke's hand, rough with rope and sun, and let him pull her up behind him. The stallion snorted, hooves shifting, then leapt forward at a steady lope that ate the miles beneath them. The trail unfurled ahead like a ribbon of shadow and starlight, the last edge of sunset giving way to a sky scattered with silver. The night air was cool against her burning cheeks, but her heart pounded with a tangle of fear and something else. She dared not name relief, sharp and aching, in the arms of a stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to voice. "You come far?" he asked after a while, his voice carrying easily over the rhythmic drumming of hooves. "Farther than sense should have led us," she murmured. "We thought we could beat the heat, settle before winter. We didn't plan for the land to fight back." Luke was quiet for a moment, his silhouette framed by the stars. "The land always fights back. What matters is whether you've got enough left to fight with it." His words weren't cruel, just true, like the clean edge of a blade. They rode in silence then, Samuel's weight slumped against him, her hands clutching the back of the saddle, the night stretching long and cold. Once, when her grip faltered, Luke shifted slightly to steady her, the gesture so instinctive it caught her breath. He didn't speak more than needed, didn't ask the questions that burned at the back of her throat: who he was, where he came from, why he had stopped for them, when he could have ridden past and saved himself the trouble. But there was something in the way he watched the horizon, something in the surety of his hands, that made her feel, for the first time in days, that she wasn't alone on this endless, punishing trail. By the time the first pale light touched the distant fields, the cabin came into view, rough-hewn logs, a crooked chimney, the faint curl of smoke that meant they had made it before the world claimed what little they still had. Luke dismounted first, catching Samuel as he slid from the saddle, and carried him across the yard with the same care he had shown from the start. Mary followed, numb with exhaustion and disbelief, as he laid her husband on the bed, checked his breathing, and told her in that same steady voice, "Keep him cool, give him water in small sips. He'll need rest, but he'll live." She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat, tangled with all the nights of fear and the sudden, overwhelming relief that made her knees tremble. Instead, she gripped his arm, the coarse fabric of his coat rough beneath her fingers. "I don't know how to repay you," she whispered. Luke shook his head. "You don't owe me. Out here, we do what we can for each other. One day, you'll do the same for someone else." He stayed through the day, helping mend the firewood pile, checking the roof where the last storm had torn it loose, showing her how to draw water without straining the pump. Not because she asked, but because kindness in a place like this was rare and needed. That night, as Samuel slept and the crickets hummed in the fields, Mary stood on the porch, watching Luke saddle his horse beneath a sky full of stars. "Will we see you again?" she asked. He paused, his hat in his hands, the wind tugging at the edges of his coat. "The trail runs both ways," he said softly. "If you need me, I ride near." She didn't step closer, didn't ask for more than that. But as he rode off into the dark, something in her chest loosened. The knowledge that even in the loneliest stretches of wilderness, someone might still come when you fall and carry you home. And if this story found its way into your heart, if it made you believe again in the quiet strength of strangers and the power of kindness that rides in when all hope feels lost, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this await you, of cowboys and courage, of survival and unexpected salvation, of moments when a single act of decency changes the whole trail ahead. Don't miss the next journey we ride together.